everyone, welcome to episode 52 of the Startup Playbook Podcast. My name is Rohit Bhargava, and each week I interview successful founders, investors, and subject matter experts on how they got started, the strategies they use to succeed, and their advice to current and future entrepreneurs. Before we get into this episode, just a quick reminder that part 1 and part 2 of my blog series, 50 Lessons from 50 Successful Founders, Investors, and Experts, where I go back and take out one key takeaway from each guest from the first 50 episodes of the podcast, is now available on my Medium account, which I'll link in the show notes for this episode at startupplaybook.co. It's amazing to speak with people who are the leaders within their industries, and it's even more insightful when you get to speak with people who started those industries in the first place. In episode 52, I did a live podcast interview with Don Peppers, who along with his co-author Martha Rogers has often been credited with having launched the CRM revolution with their very first book, The One-to-One Future, Building Relationships One Customer at a Time. Don is an American marketing futurist, best-selling business author, keynote speaker, and one of the world's authoritative experts on customer experience. He has spoken on customer experience in more than 80 countries on 6 continents, and his books have been translated into 18 languages. He was inducted into the Direct Marketing Association Hall of Fame along with Seth Godin and Martha Rogers, and in 2015, SatMetrix ranked him as one of the world's most authoritative experts on customer experience. The Times of London has listed Peppers among their top 50 business brains, and Accenture has included him in its global list of the top 50 business intellectuals. In the episode, we talk about what a good customer experience journey looks like, how to identify points of friction of customers, understanding when to automate and when to add a human connection, and how to create a culture of putting your customers first. A big thank you to Jason Lim and the awesome team at the York Butter Factory for setting up the interview and for inviting me along to host a live podcast with Don. So, without further ado, here's my interview with Don Peppers. Hi Don, welcome to the Startup Playbook Podcast, and thanks for taking the time out of your quick trip to Melbourne to be here tonight.
Glad to be here, Rohit.
So for those people here in the crowd today, and for those people listening at home, who might not be as familiar with your background story, do you want to share a little bit of your story and what got you here today?
You sure they're listening at home?
I hope so.
Okay.
I hope so.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, 20 years ago, Martha Rogers and I wrote a book called The One-to-One Future. We tried to imagine what life would be like when business became interactive, when people had interactivity at the home. And I don't know if a lot of you people are too young to know this, but back in the 1980s, when marketing people thought about interactivity, they thought it would work like this. You'd be watching TV on your cable television set, and you'd see a commercial for a product that you like, and you push a button and a coupon would print out of the set-top box. That's what they thought interactivity was about. My job at the time was getting new business for my ad agency. So I spent the mornings dialing the phone and trying to touch base with marketing directors and marketing VPs, and I had a 3-ring binder that I would write down what they said. My goal was for them to talk to me, and I would write down what they said, and then 6 months later I'd call back and I'd say, oh, and by the way, how'd that product launch go in Guatemala? Did that go okay? I wanted them to know that I had a relationship. We had a relationship so that when their account went up for bid and I read about it, they would take my call. That was my goal, okay? And I was pretty successful. But I was asked to go give a speech on the impact of interactivity on marketing. So I tried to imagine a scenario where a child could talk back to Tony the Tiger in a Frosted Flakes commercial, right? What would Kellogg do with what the child told them? Well, Kellogg wouldn't do anything with that information because it wasn't projectable. Kellogg was a mass marketer. If it was representative of a market or a segment, then they could act on that information. But with an individual, it's anecdotal. On the other hand, that's what I was doing in the mornings. I was trying to get people to tell me things so I could write it down and create a relationship. So that was the insight. And I gave this speech and said that when this was in 1989, I said when interactivity really happens in like 20 years, businesses are going to be in the business of putting relationships together. So I gave that speech a couple times. A woman came up afterwards, one audience, and said, well, you ought to write a book on that. I said, I'm real busy. She said, well, I'm a marketing professor. So we teamed up and we wrote a book. And our book came out in 1993, August 1993, and in January 1994, the first commercial web browser became available. Just totally by coincidence, our book was exactly at the right time, and we correctly predicted the way web hosts would use interactive relationships with their customers, and so we became kind of a cult hit among webmasters. That's what they used to call them, webmasters. Like Zen masters.
I definitely want to sort of come back to obviously some of the books that you've written and your expertise within the customer experience space. But doing my research on you, you actually have a background in astronautical engineering. Is that correct?
I am so impressed. Very good.
Thank you.
Yeah. Because most people call it aeronautical, and it's not the same. Astronautical engineering is the study of rocket science.
Absolutely. So what...
I wanted to be an astronaut when I was a kid.
Well, what led you from wanting to be an astronaut as a kid to the career path that you've sort of gone down now?
Money.
Makes sense. What was...
Next.
What was your first sort of indication in terms of you mentioned the insight that you got into where you saw the world heading. What was that sort of instigation point or the thing that kind of was the light?
When I was a kid, I really wanted to be an astronaut. I used to write books of science fiction. And when Martha Rogers and I wrote this book, The One-to-One Future, we often joked about it. It was a book of business science fiction. I really imagined writing about the future, and it was a perfect fit. Now, the way I got into advertising was totally by accident. It was just I sort of gravitated to it because it was very entrepreneurial, and it was a lot of fun. And it takes 10 minutes to learn how to do it. It's really not hard. You don't have to have a master's degree to go into advertising. And so that's what I did. And it was a lot of fun. But I think what's been the most interesting in my career is the realization I've come to that the real final arbiter of business success, more than ever before, is the customer. Because customers have this power now. They're connected with each other. They share their own views. They can find out how well your product works, not by asking you, but by asking other people who've used it. They own the relationship now, fundamentally. Yeah, they've given up their privacy. They would, I think if Martha and I made one wrong prediction in the one-to-one future, we predicted that customers would be much more chary with respect to giving up their privacy. But the truth is, at least in the United States, you sell your grandmother's Social Security number for a 5-cent coupon, and there's no big business right now in protecting privacy. I think that's going to change as we go along. But it's been. I think what's interesting is I almost view myself as the representative of the customer in the businesses I talk to now. I'm their customer whisperer.
That's
Does
very
that make
cool.
sense?
Absolutely. So I mean, and again, you've kind of touched on this as well. We went from an age where there were sort of a lot more bricks and mortar retailers. People are jumping on phones to interact with businesses, and we're doing that in a more digital setting where it's less personal.
Right.
Which makes customer experience even more important within that space. What are some of the traits of a good customer experience journey that businesses are setting up?
Okay, I think that's a great question, and a lot of companies ask it. And what I tell them is, if your name isn't Disney, your customers aren't coming to you for the experience. Okay, they're coming to you to get a problem solved or to meet some need. But guess what? If that problem would go away without them ever darkening your door, that would be ideal for them, okay? So your job as a business is to deliver an experience that is as frictionless as possible to the customer. You want the experience of their buying and installing your service or product to disappear into the background so that all they need to worry about is fixing their problem. Let me give you an example of a frictionless experience. Well, the way to remove obstacles. A friend of mine is a management consultant who specializes in selling to retailers. He told me the story that one Christmas season he was in a shopping mall and he went into an athletic shoe store to buy some new running shoes, but it was very crowded. It's Christmas season, and all the salespeople had lines of 2 or 3 people in front of him. So he got in line. He said that the first woman in line for the salesman he's waiting for was looking at some Reebok cross trainers, and the salesman made her a pitch for a different brand, an off-brand called New American. And the salesman's pitch was, yeah, Reebok makes a great cross trainer, but New American, you may not have heard of this brand, but it's a new brand, and they make a great cross trainer, and it's about half the price of the Reebok. Why don't I bring them up? So he brought up the New American. She tried them on, and she didn't even try on the Reebok. She left. So my friend is fascinated by this. Okay, the next guy up is looking at some basketball shoes, and the salesman made him the same pitch. Said, if you don't need the swoosh from Nike on your shoes, if you're not into the brand, you just want really good basketball shoes, here's some really good shoes from New American. They cost about half as much as the Nike. And he made the same pitch and sold the same shoes. So now it's my friend's turn to get served. And he's fascinated because obviously New American has cracked the code on getting shoe salesmen to push their brand. He wanted to know what their secret was, so when it's his turn, he says, I couldn't help but notice, and so I really, and the salesman got kind of nervous. And my friend said, so it's a special commission, right? A commission? No, friend, no. It's a contest. They're doing a contest? No. Just tell me. I'm in the business. I just want. And the salesman got nervous. He looked around. He said, don't tell my manager. I won't. I just want to know what their secret is. He said, look how busy it is in the store on a Christmas weekend, Saturday afternoon. I don't have time to go to the bathroom on a Saturday afternoon. New American, when they ship their shoes to this store, their laces are already in them. And that's the question I ask businesses today. Do you ship your shoes to customers with the laces in them? Okay? If there's anything that you could do for the customer that you make the customer do for themselves, that's friction in your experience. That's friction. You want to take that and you want to take that friction out, okay, in order to create a really frictionless experience. Because customer loyalty is not highly correlated with satisfaction. It's disloyalty that is correlated with dissatisfaction. The world is full of a lot of customers that are very satisfied with one brand, and they go to another brand, they're just as happy. The reason they move, the reason they take the energy to move, is because they have some point of dissatisfaction somewhere, some piece of friction that you've left in the experience. So don't leave any friction in the experience. That's my advice.
Sure. So on that, it can be hard when you've got so many different variables, so many different things going on in your business. How do you find those friction points for customers?
Well, you've heard of customer journey mapping. You've heard of that, right? That's probably the easiest way to do it. Different businesses have different approaches. Fidelity in the United States, their customer experience vice president has a $2 million budget that can be tapped $100,000 at a time on her say-so by herself. Doesn't require board approval to fix points of friction. In the book Outside In by Harley Manning, the Forrester analyst, he tells a story about one contact center person who noticed that people were calling in because they were having a hard time logging in through the IVR system to their personal accounts on Fidelity. And he talked to a colleague of his at the call center, and he'd noticed the same thing. So they went to the vice president, got $20,000, fixed the software with the vendor, and have deferred now probably $4 million worth of calls a year that Fidelity was getting that they don't no longer have to get. That's an example of seeking out friction by empowering people. Amazon, which has my vote as the world's most customer-centric company. By the way, it's coming to Australia, and you guys are all going to benefit. I mean, it's and it's going to create a lot of opportunities, I think, in the space for a better customer experience. Because Australians, when they get used to Amazon, they're not going to be happy with the experience they get at Kohl's or anywhere else. Okay, they're just not going to be happy anymore. They're going to compare everything to Amazon. What Amazon doesn't want to receive any phone calls. When I receive a phone call on Amazon, it's because my website has failed for some reason. Well, it's a problem. So what Amazon measures is what they call the NRR, the negative resolution rate. They survey by email everybody who phones in. Did we resolve your problem? Yes or no? Okay. And they get about a 90% response rate after 2 prompts, right? And they want a negative resolution rate in the low single digits. That's their goal. But the reason they survey 100% of people, because they could measure the negative response rate, they could measure the average rate by surveying every 100th person. The reason they survey everybody is anyone whose problem was not resolved, they put a tiger team on that problem and try to fix it so that that customer is satisfied and the problem doesn't recur. That's a really good way to find points of friction. In Outside In, Harley Manning outlines what they call a friction fighter exercise, which is also really worthwhile. That's a good book to get if you're interested in this kind of issue. And while I said the ideal customer experience is frictionless, what that really means is that the ideal frictionless experience is automated. Okay? People don't want to deal with people if they don't have to deal for transactional reasons. Nobody wants to go into a bank and deal with a teller if I can get it done like that at an ATM machine. However, when something goes wrong, I need to talk to a person. And I want an empathetic person. I don't want a chatbot, okay? I want somebody who understands me. I want a human connection. And only after the experience is totally frictionless, which means probably highly automated, only at that time can I actually pay attention to making a human connection with a brand or a company. At that point, then I'm open. Then I'm going to, I'll give you an example. We had a meeting earlier today, and an older gentleman in the meeting confessed that he'd taken Uber for the first time the other day. And he said he was delighted with the experience. The experience was great. It was totally frictionless, and he talked all about what a great experience it was. The reason he did that was because the experience was frictionless. He made a connection with Uber. Okay, if the experience had had an ounce of friction in it, he wouldn't be bragging about it and talking about it. It wouldn't have made an impression on him. So if you want to make an impression on customers, if you want to connect with them, then first thing is take all the obstacles out of the path. Ship your shoes with the laces in it.
Sure. Speaking of taking out all of the obstacles and people, a big part of that is, developing that culture of putting customer experience first. It's not enough to just have your website having the greatest customer experience if your supply chain or logistics or packaging, or the product itself doesn't meet expectations. So how do you develop that culture of putting customer experience first?
That is a great question, and it's probably the single most talked about topic I've had this trip in Australia. Because a lot of these large companies, they already get it with respect to the point of a good customer experience and so forth. What they often don't get is the fact that it's your ordinary hourly workers who have day-to-day contact with customers. For the customer, that employee is your company. That is your brand, that person, okay? So that hourly employee needs to be really motivated. What my argument is that, let me tell you a story, okay? In the late 1700s, an Austrian civil servant built himself a wooden man and dressed him up in an oriental costume and sat him behind a chess table. It became known as the Mechanical Turk. Okay, the Mechanical Turk played chess. You could sit down across from the Mechanical Turk and you would move a piece, and the Mechanical Turk's arm would come out and he'd move a piece, and then you move a piece, he'd move a piece. So the civil servant took this contraption all around Europe until one day in Paris, the Mechanical Turk played a chess master in the palace, and he beat the chess master. Whereupon, possibly because he was French, the chess master was so insulted at having been beaten by a machine that he went up to the machine and he yanked the cabinetry apart, and underneath the table was a little man with levers and magnets moving the pieces around. He said, "Hey, there's a person in there." That is the secret to a good customer experience. There has to be a person in there somewhere, okay? You can have the Mechanical Turk, you can have all your automation, there has to be a person in there somewhere. I think if your employees have a good culture, it means that the employees are engaged in their work. They like working where they're working. They feel a sense of mission, okay, a purpose that's beyond just shareholder value. They're creating some benefit for society or something. and they're in a collegial environment, and they're enabled. Okay, if employees are engaged in their work, and if they're enabled by having the authority to make a decision and having access to the right information and data and tools and training to make that decision, then employees can do it by themselves. They can self-organize. Self-organization is the future of almost all business. Self-organization is how app-based services work, like Uber and Airbnb. They're self-organizing. That's the way the company's culture needs. Let me give you an example of we'll give a demonstration of self-organization.
Sounds great.
Okay? I'm going to close my eyes. I want you guys to start clapping, but I want you to clap in unison. Okay? Go ahead. Okay. Think about what was happening. That took like 3/4 of a second to do, okay? Sometimes it takes a couple seconds in a big crowd. Sometimes it's taken as long as 5 seconds in a large crowd. But eventually everybody claps in unison. Now what was happening? You're clapping and you're listening to others. You're adjusting, they're adjusting. Nobody was at the front of the room going clap, 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 was there? Right? You self-organized. If your employees are engaged in the work, okay, they like working where they're working, they like doing what they're doing, they like what your company is doing, and if they're enabled to take the right action, then you don't have to ask them, you don't have to require them to delight customers, you just let them do it. You let them do it. Let me give you an example of self-organization in this country. Commonwealth Bank. I had a meeting with Commonwealth Bank last May, and Victoria, the CMO. Anybody from Commonwealth? Anybody deal with Commonwealth here? That's a raised eyebrow. Okay. I can't remember her last name, but she's the CMO. She told me about an experiment they were doing. They were several months into it. Apparently, the way they work is this. At the call center at Commonwealth Bank, when a call comes in and there's no scripted solution, there's no prescribed way to handle a particular problem, let's say. Normally, when a call comes in like that, you escalate. You go up to your supervisor goes to the VP checks with legal, comes back down to the VP, goes to the supervisor, takes a week and a half or 2 weeks. That's normally, and it's costly. Here's what CBA said. From now on, you get a call like that, and if you think you know a fair thing to do for the customer, the only authority you need to make that offer to the customer is get someone else's agreement at the contact center, some other agent. If they also agree that it's the right thing to do, they sign off on it, the two of you agree, you're authorized, you can do it right there on the spot. She said she's had this program in place for several months. They review all the two-party decisions every month, every 30 days. They review all of it. They haven't had to reverse a single decision. And the contact center agents are all jazzed. They're in charge now, okay? They're all innovated. That's an example of self-organization. That's self-organization.
Fantastic. So speaking of customer experience, is there any particular stage or time that is right for either a startup or a business to start thinking about or focusing on customer experience?
Yeah, before you start up. Yeah, you should think about the customer experience when you have your first concept. Okay, you can design a business to meet some need, but you need to design the experience into the business, and you need to make it as streamlined as possible. I think there are decades of management consulting opportunity out there among these big businesses with lousy customer experiences. Okay, I think there's decades of opportunity, which means there are tremendous opportunities to run circles around them even today. Every really successful, name me a really successful startup that doesn't have at its center customer experience. I think the customer is the ultimate disruptor. The ultimate disruptor. I may be wrong, but I can't think of an exception, to that rule. So I think you should be maniacally focused on the user experience, the customer experience, and take all the friction out. Do customer journey mapping, have customers in, talk with them, have a customer council, do anything you can to get as the most honest opinion from your customers as you can get. Realizing also that there's no such thing as the customer. Every customer is different. Every customer is a human being. Every customer is totally unique. So you need a way to strategize how to deal with that issue. I think an ideal customer experience is one that is not just reliable, where the product works, okay? It's not just valuable, that is, it's a reasonably good value proposition, but it's also relevant to the customer. So the customer doesn't have to tell you again what he told you the first time, never has to repeat anything, that you don't make an offer to the customer that is patently absurd or out of bounds or something the customer's already bought, let's say, all of which are sins of big companies today. They're all we all have that. Let me give you an example of relevance. Think about the last time you had a problem with some product or service, okay, and you went on their website and you spent 20 minutes or 40 minutes on the website. You're trying to figure it out, right? And you couldn't figure it out, so you get off the web and you call them. What's the first thing you have to do when you call them?
Wait.
Self-identify, and then explain exactly what you just spent 40 minutes on their website doing. You have to explain what you were doing, right? Because they don't know. And yet, the technologies exist today for businesses all around the world to know. If you have an app, make sure there's a click to call button in the app. So if I'm on your app and I'm trying to figure stuff out, I don't have to get off the app and call in separately, so the contact center agent has to ask me now what I was doing. So go. Or on the website, I'll tell you what Amazon does. They use a call me button. On Amazon, if I want to call in because I have a problem, I click the call me button and I schedule a time, and they call me. They have access to my clickstream. One of my clients is a company called Teletech. They're a big business process outsourcer. They handle a lot of Telstra calls and so forth. They do something called the temporal phone number. A lot of their clients have 4,000 or 5,000 different phone numbers. And when I'm on the Bank of America website, for instance, and I need to call, I look at the phone number. That phone number is unique to my website visit, okay? And it's unique to me for about 4 hours. If that number calls, it's me calling, okay? So Bank of America knows, all right? All these are found. These technologies exist. They exist. They've been around for a decade. But how many companies use them? Why? Because at most companies, the customer experience is not part of the corporate mentality. They're not worried about the customer experience. They're worried about the shareholder experience. They're worried about the money that they're going to get. They don't connect the dots with respect to user experience, I think.
Sure. For companies that are at that stage that are then sort of now starting to think about customer experience, what is your sort of process that you take clients through, or what would you sort of recommend them as a starting point? How do they get started in sort of identifying, where the friction is and how they can improve their customer experience?
Journey mapping is a really good workhorse exercise in any company. It's really not hard. It's easy to do. Sit down and imagine what the steps are that a customer goes through to get from A to B, and if they want to get this done, then this has to happen. Look behind the scenes and see what processes have to be connected in your company. And journey mapping is a really good example. If you're doing journey mapping, then be sure to break up your customer base into different personas, different types of customers, different. It doesn't have to be through research. You can use judgment to do that because it's not really market research. But if you have research, be sure to rely on it to the extent you can. We have a pet sitting service where people volunteer to be pet sitters. Let's say like the Uber of pet sitting. So what kinds of people might do the volunteering, and what are their motivations? If you've ever done any classes in startup, I'm sure you have. Customer experience is why most companies end up pivoting, because they find that customer experience isn't the right thing, or customers don't want that experience. They want a different experience. So be free to pivot. Be ready. Be ready to, put your MVC up. Put your most viable, minimum viable product up, MVP up, put that up soon, and test it on customers and see what kind of experience they have. See if you could shorten the experience or make it pleasurable or make it interesting. There's a startup company called Swervays. Have you seen Swervays? Anybody see Swervays? Really interesting, spelled like it sounds, like surveys with a W in it. It's the Tinder of surveys. Okay, you swipe right or swipe left with to say yes you agree or no you don't. So it's like a fun survey to take. I think things that borrow experience from related products are easier for customers to understand out of the box than anything. If you create a totally new experience, it's going to be harder for customers to really get it. Think about this. Today, if you give a Kindle to a 3-year-old, she'll start enlarging it like that, right? Because they're used to that. So think of those kinds of experiences that people are used to and leverage them for your startup, for your business.
Sure. Speaking of personas, one of the things that we were talking about before we turned on the microphone was you've given talks in 63 different countries now.
63 countries, yeah.
And so obviously doing business in a lot of Australian startups are now starting to look at Asia, where culturally things are very different, and the habits of individuals there is very different as well. So how does a company that's based in Australia that's looking to expand into different regions, how would you recommend that they go about creating a unique customer experience within those?
I think customer experience needs to be culturally specific. I think Japanese people, Korean people, Chinese, Africans, I think every different culture, they expect different kinds of experiences. They have different kinds of cultural mores. If I were in the startup business and I wanted to go into a different country, I'd want a native speaker of the language, a native resident of the place on my board or as one of my advisors. I'd want to, and I'd use that person to do the customer journey mapping and to steer the way. I've had a lot of experience with different cultures and some almost comical. I remember in the 90s, I was invited to come to Germany. Germany had published our book, The One-to-One Future. They'd published it as Die Eins zu Eins Zukunft in German. And so I was invited to give a talk, and there was a group of about 50, maybe 100, but they were all men, all in ties and suits, right, and all Germans. And I'm giving this talk. Some are listening, but most are listening in English. And the whole theme is about one-to-one marketing, about treating different customers differently, treating you different from him, different from her, based on what I think I know about you. That's one-to-one marketing. It's CRM, it's customer experience management, whatever you want to call it, but that's what it is. At the end, the guy got up. He said, excuse me. He said, this would never work in Germany. I said, why not? He said, we're all Germans here. And everybody goes, yeah. It was like a totally different culture. I think culture is unique, and to me that was a perplexing comment, because it was like totally not understandable to me until you like get into that culture. The Japanese have their own culture. It's they're very social to begin with. They don't believe in competition. Why compete with somebody if you could combine with them? You could buy them, or whatever. I think it's important to understand the culture of a country you're going into. It's a sad thing, but I think cultures are homogenizing because of technology also. 6,000 languages are spoken, it's estimated, in the world. And one goes extinct about every week today. And so the more cultures homogenize, the less you have to worry about it. But we're losing something also. I think to design the right customer experience, be friendly and accessible to the culture you're marketing into.
Sure. And you spoke about one-to-one, and we spoke about this at the start of the interview as well. But the concept that you and Martha sort of came up with at the very beginning was 20 years ahead of its time. For startups or businesses that are very innovative in nature, are doing something new and different and offer a different perspective, how do they approach or how do they sort of get something into a market the same way you did for something that was just new that people may not be as familiar with?
Yeah. Well, I think we were lucky. I want to emphasize that. We were very lucky because while our prediction was right, we were also lucky that we were proved right immediately and totally by coincidence immediately after the book came out. I think that any great idea is always obvious in retrospect. That's why it's great, okay? And if you have a startup, if it's a great idea, then it's going to be really obvious to somebody you explain it to within the first few seconds of explaining it. If it's not great enough yet, okay? You want to make it so simple, so easy. You want the elevator speech to be like 10 seconds, okay? What is this about? I'll give you one example. I'm going to talk about PayActive.
Yes.
One of the ventures that I'm associated with is a company called PayActive. PayActive is a US-based company, but they have an Australian company that's launching down here. Michael McLaughlin is the CEO, and Brett and my friend Grant are investors. I'm associated with, and Darcy. Hello, Darcy. Thank you very much. And my friend Safwan Shah is Pakistani by birth, Catholic by education, and American citizen, naturalized. And he's the CEO. And it's not his first rodeo. It's his second or third company. It's a really interesting idea that has to do with between paycheck financing. If you're an hourly worker and you're living paycheck to paycheck, you have an emergency between paychecks. You need to pay $400 to somebody to get the car repaired or get the car out of jail or something like that, okay? Where do you go for that money? There isn't any place. You go to a payday lender or a pawn shop, maybe you get a pay advance from the company. Well, what PayActive does is they have a very frictionless, easy to operate payroll advance system. Basically, the way it works is you're an employer, you sign up to offer PayActive to your employees. The PayActive employees download an app. They have the PayActive app on their smartphones. With that app, I can see, and the employer sends PayActive on a daily basis. They send them a time and attendance file. Okay, so PayActive can tell an employee. The employee pushes the button. They can see how much money they've earned, but not yet been paid. Okay, and what PayActive says is, we'll give you access to up to 50% of the net earned but unpaid wages, net of tax deductions, at any point. So, and I have a bill pay option. So I could, if I've got a cable bill that's $150 and I got to pay it or I'm going to have a reconnect fee, I download, and I've earned $400, let's say. I download $150 to my app. I pay the bill. Money never touches my account. And there's a one-time transaction charge of $5. This pays capital costs and so forth. Like some employers elect to pay that fee. But what PayActive is really doing is they're taking the old 20th century batch processing payroll system and they're making it real time. That's all they're doing. They're disintermediating, not payday lenders, they're disintermediating the payroll function. And it's such an easy thing to explain, and it's so frictionless for employees. You need that kind of idea. A big idea is something that's easy, is taking on a big problem with a simple solution that's frictionless. Okay, as frictionless as you can.
Absolutely. On that note, Don, thanks for being
Thank
here
you,
tonight
Rohit.
and for sharing your advice and insights.
We want to have questions from the outside?
Yes, absolutely. So we'll open it up to questions. But for anyone that wants to get in touch with you, find out more about PayActive, what's the best way for them to do that?
You can go to payactive.com. you can see the thing there. My company is CX Speakers, CX for customer experience, cxspeakers.com. I sold my company, Peppers and Rogers Group. Martha and I sold it to Teletech, and when I left Teletech, they still want that name, so I can't call myself Peppers anymore. I have to make up a name for myself, so that's it. But my business card is going to say Don Peppers himself, so that's me.
Fantastic.
CX Speakers.
Don,
Thank
thanks
you.
once again. Thanks to everyone that's here, and YBF, thank you so much for putting on a great event.
Here, here.
tonight. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to episode 52 of the Startup Playbook Podcast. You can find the show notes of my interview with Don, along with a curated list of tools and resources for startup founders at startupplaybook.co. As always, you can join the conversation through our Twitter account. The handle is @PlaybookStartup. Next week, I will be interviewing Pete Cooper. If you aren't familiar with Pete, you definitely should be. He's been one of the pillars in growing the Australian startup ecosystem, particularly in his hometown of Sydney. Pete is best known for founding the SydStart conference, the first tech conference of its kind in the country, and he actively mentors, invests, and is helping to develop an ecosystem to provide the best chances for startups to succeed in the local community. Don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date with our latest episodes. Thank you for listening, and I will see you at episode 53 next week.